So, what exactly is this? Well, what if I told you it was really easy to construct and allowed you to practice your cueing almost anywhere? This is Break From Life. Welcome back, and if it's your first time watching one of our videos, then it's fantastic to have you here. Before we begin making your own home practice box, we need to consider why I'd need one in the first place. You see, it's all because of a problem I used to have. Although I had a lot of time for playing snooker, I didn't live anywhere near a snooker club or have any easy way of getting to a snooker table. This was, of course, until I got a job. And at the same time, I was lucky enough to find a double garage within walking distance of my house. Not only did I now have a snooker table close by, but I also had enough money to be able to afford my own car. Getting a job had solved my two problems, but it had also given me a new one. I now had very little time to actually play snooker, especially with the amount I was working back then, so I had to make the most of any practice. So I thought to myself, driving ranges, what if there was a snooker equivalent of one of those? So I got a couple of bits of wood together and I came up with this, and this meant you could play a lot of repetitive shots in quick succession. I realised very quickly though this had two major drawbacks. It would wear the cloth out a lot wherever you used it, and it didn't really give you any feedback as to how well you were actually playing the shot. So now I had some idea of what I was actually doing, I decided to build another one with the intention of solving both of these problems. Now this Mark II version does have some big positives, like you can't bear the bass and you can tell which direction the cue ball's going in, but there's some negatives as well. The shiny wood obviously wasn't level and it still wore a groove in the middle of it. It would also jump off the cushion because the cue ball was slightly higher. And slightly higher up in the world is Mr. Itchybod from Edmonton in Canada. Here's how you can make one of these things that actually works and doesn't even require the cushion of a snooker table. You're going to need a piece of plywood and a second piece of plywood that's been cut in half, two pieces of wood to join the smaller bits together with, two more pieces of wood the size of the smaller two pieces of plywood, as well as four half that length and a measuring piece the size of the ball, a hammer, various selection of nails, and a saw to cut the pieces of wood into the right size, some elastic bands, some felt, some fabric tape, and some scissors. And it turned out you also need two more half-size pieces and a length of wood that's the size of the longest end, and ideally a small piece of sticky back Velcro. Once you roughly know where they're going to go, you need to begin by joining the two half-sized plies together. I'm using the small measuring block here to make sure I have the exact gap of a snooker ball at the far end. You want to join the ply right at the top and in the middle, in that way it doesn't block your line of sight and it also doesn't get in the way of the ball, as it can jump a little way in the air from time to time. This is by far the trickiest and most awkward bit to get right, and if you're less of a pikey than I am, you might want to use screws instead of nails. But hopefully you should get the basic shape fairly quickly, as wide as possible at one end, and at the other end just wide enough for a ball to fit through. Once you've done this, you can then begin adding the four half-size pieces, on the inside on the wide end and on the outside on the narrow end. The top should then slot into place with a base like this. The two longer pieces can then be added to the top, and in this way you can hold it still, and we can also attach the elastic bands, creating our artificial cushion. And it was at this point I realised you needed the two extra half-size pieces to hold the top in place at the other end. These should be attached to the top beside the ones on the base to prevent the top from moving, even though it isn't physically secured to the base. If you followed all of that, it should look something like this, a bit like half a boat. The next thing you need to do is fix in place the elastic band cushion. This consists of 3 nails to hold 3 elastic bands in place between halfway and 3/4 of the way up the ball. And spoiler alert, you're going to need an elastic band right at the bottom as low as you can get it, because not having this actually causes problems towards the end of the video. I've also stretched a couple of elastic bands all the way around all of the nails. So long as you have the nails spaced fairly evenly apart, this actually works a lot like a normal cushion. But with these two bits pulling the top together, of course you're going to need an extra bit of wood to hold them apart. This is the extra bit I forgot about earlier, but of course you can't actually measure it up until we get to this stage. From here it's just a case of cutting the felt to the right length, which is more than twice the width of the base and long enough to reach between the rods at each end. I'm then using the fabric tape to stick the felt to itself so the cloth will be able to rotate around the base to alleviate wear marks. This does mean you'll have to add a small piece of cloth between the smaller poles, and I'm going to fasten them together with a small piece of Velcro. The small bump will cause the cue ball to bounce, but I'm hoping this helps reduce the wear on the cloth even more. All that really remains to be done now is to measure up and cover the sides, and you can use as much material as you have left for this really. Something else I forgot you'd need is masking tape, which is absolutely crucial to prevent the cue ball from running out of the box and to trap it in the right place. You will have to mould it into the right shape, and you will find it takes a few goes before you actually get it right. All that's really left to do then is just finish off our artificial cushion. I've taped over the sharp nails and I'm just putting a piece of cloth all the way around the elastic bands and the piece of wood at the back. I'm also adding two pieces of cloth along the side that make sure the cue ball has to actually hit the cushion and not the wooden bits at the sides. And as long as that actually works, that's it, and we can go to Sean O'Toole, who is in Dublin in Ireland. Alright, so let's give this a try. Ha! The cue ball was bouncing around too much, kept coming out the other end, bouncing off the elastic bands inconsistently, and every now and again it was getting stuck underneath the elastic bands, no matter what I put in the way. So I was forced into making one or two minor adjustments, like placing some nails and an elastic band as low as I could get them, so the cue ball hopefully wouldn't be able to get underneath it. And this is what happened. So I've made one or two minor adjustments and now it more or less works perfectly. And with what I've done at the other end, the cue ball can no longer come out, mostly because I've got put quite a bit of tape on both sides here, and that stops the cue ball coming out and that traps it in this position. Now you remember it was jumping a bit too much. Well, what I've actually done is stick another small piece of cloth in right here to make it exactly the same height, so there's less of a bump. And there's only a little tiny bump here now, and that's because there's a bit of Velcro there, but that's perfect because it just jumps it enough to stop it wearing this cloth too much, but makes it jump little enough that it doesn't jump out. Another good thing, if it does start to wear, you can unpick this and very slightly move everything over. Place it back down again in a slightly different place so you're wearing a slightly different bit of it. I've also added this stronger, firmer bit of wood in because the other one kept falling off. And it is a bit rough around the edges, but for a minute it's good enough for what I want to do. So how well does it work? Well, it means you can play a ridiculous amount of shots in one go. But of course it doesn't just work on a snooker table, you can also use it on a dining room table, a kitchen table, or even just use it outside. If you want to get it exactly at the right height though, you can use an ironing board, and this means you can get it at snooker table height, English 8-ball height, or even American pool height. So is it actually any good? Well, after we find Nurhan in Ankara, Turkey, we're going to find out. Generally, this thing does everything I wanted it to do. It allows you to play a number of repetitive shots, and it gives you some feedback without wearing out the table too much, or even needing a snooker table. Is it perfect? No. Ideally you'd have a longer piece of wood, so when you put your hand down it'll be at the same height as the ball, not very slightly below it. I don't think this is a big problem though, and this bit is a bit wobbly. I wish it was more flush, but of course if I attach it to here then I'm not going to be able to slide the cloth underneath, so I'm a bit stuck with that. But for something that I just nailed together in a couple of hours, cost me next to nothing, only a small amount for a bit of felt, and it's just made out of wood, felt and some elastic bands, I think it's pretty good. And weirdly, it's actually quite fun. If you want more hacks for snooker, then why not see how this simple laser level can be used as an aiming guide? Or if you want to find out more about snooker itself, then why not find out about snooker's biggest controversies? And remember, don't just watch, play, and make the commitment to becoming a better player by subscribing to the channel and visit the website. See you later.